All right, hello everybody. I have something for you today that's going to mostly involve stuff that I did yesterday, as I mentioned. But what I wanted to do, what I thought would be fun to try out, would be to just kind of show you guys one of my favorite recipes. I got this book at a used bookstore like 10 years ago or something like that, and you can see that the spine's all screwed up, and it was like that when I bought it. It just kind of fell apart due to like just constant, just like normal use. But like this is a good book for like introductory cooking stuff. It's not like super widespread international. You're gonna find a little bit of kind of, you know, a little bit of Indian, a little bit of Asian, but nothing like particularly way out there kind of thing. And so you're gonna need supplemental cookbooks if you want to cook, more international cuisine. But there's a lot of really good stuff in here, and there's a lot of like information about like techniques for cooking and stuff like that too. How to peel this, how to slice that, how to put this together. What happens when you add more this? What happens when you add more that? A lot of people talk about like there's that kitchen laboratory cookbook or something, but like I don't know. I haven't tried that one out. I use this one a lot. And what happened was a few years ago I bought this one because the spine on the yellow one is so messed up. I thought I'd get a new one. And the problem with the red edition, this is the 10th anniversary completely revised edition, is that they messed up the way that the recipes are written in some places. Um, just to give you an example, I'll see if I can find. Let's. So there's pizza dough. Yeah, so like in the red edition, the ingredient lists are incomplete. It'll show you like that you need bread flour or all-purpose flour. It'll show you that you need yeast and salt and olive oil. But what it doesn't say is it doesn't say how much water you need for the recipe. That's actually in the text of the recipe, which is a little irritating if you kind of forget the amount. A lot of like the basic liquid ingredients are like in the body of the recipe text and not in the list of ingredients, which makes it a little bit inconvenient to like, oh, I remember how to make this, but I don't remember the exact ratios of stuff. Whereas if I look at like pizza dough in this one, I'm pretty sure it says, yeah, you're gonna need 1 cup water in the list of ingredients. Polenta, pickles, pizza stone, pizza, basic pizza dough, 258. So yeah, if I show you this one says, yeah, 1 to 1 1/4 cups water is in the ingredients list. And so like if you can find a copy of the yellow one, it has the recipes written in a more convenient and sensible way. But if you're stuck with the red one, just know that you're going to have to find liquid ingredients in the text of the recipe. Anyway, what we're going to go through today is we're going to go through just a really basic pizza recipe. The pizza dough recipe from this book is really fantastic. It can be used for all kinds of stuff. You can use it for thin crust, you can use it for thick crust, you can use it for focaccia, you can use it for breadsticks, you can use it for, croutons. It's super versatile. And so what I wanted to do is go through one of these really versatile recipes, and then what I'm going to do with it is I'm going to make kind of a, or at least I made kind of a, kind of a poor man's, basic Detroit-style pizza with it, which is a pizza with a moderately thick crust, not super hard, but made crispy on the edges by melted cheese, which is why we're going to cook it in a dark metal non-stick dish. I think an 8x8, kind of casserole dish. So we're going to get to that in just a minute, but basically that's what this video today is going to be. It's going to be me cutting together the different methods, kind of explaining a little bit about why you do certain things a certain way. I thought this would be a fun thing to try, just to play around. And I use this pizza dough recipe all the time, so it's super handy for people to know it. What I might do eventually is I might do. I kind of came up with this interesting variation on the pizza margherita that I'm probably going to do a video on that someday, but not today. Today we're just going to do a basic cheese and pepperoni Detroit-style, pseudo-Detroit-style pizza. And, as you can tell from my physique, I'm not, this is not dietary advice in the sense that, like, I can vouch for the taste and the texture, but the nutrition value, well, take it with a grain of low sodium salt substitute. Anyway, without further ado, we're going to get to the actual making of the dough, making of the pizza, and that'll do it. See you in a minute. Okay, so we're actually going to make half of the recipe of this pizza dough from Mark Bittman's book. We're going to start with half a cup of water. As you can see, half a cup there. We're going to heat that up in the microwave. Now, for half a cup of water to get it to the right temperature for yeast, typically that takes 30 to 40 seconds using my microwave. You'll have to experiment with your own to see what works best for you. You want the water to get a little bit above 120 Fahrenheit. And then you'll let it cool down to the proper temperature for the yeast. Now we're scooping 1 cup of bread flour. The recipe calls for about 1.5 cups. That is to say, it calls for 3 cups, and we're cutting that in half. To that cup of flour, we're going to add 1 teaspoon of salt. This is just standard sea salt, nothing special about it. Now, the reason that we're starting with only the cup of flour is because 2 reasons. Number 1, probably that's a little bit more than a cup if it were properly measured, because scooping like that tends to compress the flour. The other reason is that it's way easier to add more flour to a wet ball of dough than it is to add water to a dry ball of dough. Typically, adding water will make the surface of the dough slick and sticky and gross, but adding flour, you can incorporate that much more easily. You'll also notice that I'm using a candy thermometer here, just to get the temperature of the yeast right, or the temperature of the water right. It started out a little hot, but we're going to let it cool down, and then we'll start proofing the yeast. So, you can see now that the temperature of the water is a little bit under 120 Fahrenheit. Now, the active dry yeast I'm using asks for the water to be about 115 at most. But what we're doing here is we're adding about 1/2 teaspoon of granulated sugar, which is going to give the yeast something to eat as they proof. And that's going to reduce the temperature of the water a little bit more, which should get it to a safe temperature for the yeast. We're going to add about 1 teaspoon of yeast. This doesn't need to be exact. None of the numbers here need to be really exact, but these are approximately correct. You can add a little bit more yeast if you feel like it. If you're using instant yeast, you're going to add the yeast to the bread flour directly. But for this active dry yeast, we're going to need to give it a little warm water and let it proof for a few minutes. Stir it thoroughly so all the yeast is in the water and not on the sides of the cup. And we'll leave this for a few minutes and let it bubble up, and we'll see that next. All right. We've given the yeast about 5 minutes to proof. It's nice and bubbly now. If you leave it too long, you'll get this froth on the top that you don't really want to have sticking around. We're going to scrape any extra yeasty residue out of the cup. And then we're going to add about 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Again, this doesn't need to be exact. Often I'll just pour a generous dollop of olive oil in there. But 2 tablespoons is about the right amount, just to kind of get your feel for it the first time. We're adding a little bit of oil to this dough, which will help with its texture a little bit for the purposes of pizza. If you're making French bread, for instance, you won't add anything oily to the dough, but for pizza dough, it does help to have a little bit of olive oil. And the more flavorful olive oil you can have, the better. We're going to stir this gently a little bit until it kind of forms a rough ball. It's worth noting that you can use melted butter or any other oil that you prefer for this. For pizza, I usually like the olive oil, but melted butter works pretty well too, especially if you're going to make something like breadsticks or something like that. It's going to be wet, and that's kind of by design. Again, it's much easier to add flour to a wet dough than water to a dry dough. We're going to expect to add about a little under 1/2 cup of flour to this. You can make a relatively dry dough, which is really good for like thin crust pizza, or you can make a more wet dough, more puffy, airy wet dough for what we're doing. We're going to aim for a wet dough for this one. But as you can see, it's kind of coming together into a ball now. We're going to start adding our first little bit of flour. I'm using the same cup thing, but as you can see, I'm not compressing anything this time. So we're going to add flour a couple of tablespoons, or about a tablespoon at a time. Mix it in until we reach the desired consistency. We'll speed through this real quick. Once we've formed the dough into a nice ball, we're going to add a little bit of olive oil to the sides of the bowl. This is kind of fun, actually. Then we put the dough in, upside down first, then flip it over so it's right side up. Get a little oil over the whole thing. Cover it gently. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put it into an oven that has been heated up to just a little bit over room temperature. You don't want to cook the yeast. You don't want it to be hot. You just want it to be a very lightly warm oven. This will work also if your house is, at a reasonable temperature. Mine's a little bit cool because it's November. And so what I will typically do is I'll turn the oven on for about 2 minutes and then turn it off manually. And once we get there, that'll give it just enough warmth to heat that dough up and let the yeast do its thing. All right. We've proofed the dough for about an hour in the warm oven. We've got our pan. We're going to use a dark metal pan because we want those crispy edges on that cheese. So I'm going over and getting some butter. Now, I used olive oil in the dough itself, but one of the things that I had a lot growing up in Michigan was Hungry Howie's Pizza. And they have they have a bunch of different flavored doughs, or flavored crusts. But actually, one of their best ones is just the plain butter crust. And what it is it's got butter, melted butter, kind of brushed over it after the pizza's done, and probably before the pizza's done too. So what we're going to do is we're going to generously grease this pan with butter, which is going to help give us a nice buttery flavor in the crust. I'm using about a half a tablespoon, or a little less than half a tablespoon of butter here, to just kind of get the bottom and the walls of this thing nice and greased up. That'll help prevent it from sticking to the sides as well. But, the reason I'm using butter and not something like shortening or olive oil is because I want that butter flavor in the edges of the crust and on the bottom of the crust as well. It also adds a nice color, which you don't quite get as easily from olive oil. That kind of melted butter, you get that Maillard reaction, which gives you that kind of nice brown crispiness. It's quite appealing, both visually and, tastefully. I didn't use up the whole half tablespoon of butter to grease the bottom. But what I did was I took the other half of a tablespoon and I chopped it into little bits. And we're just going to spread those around on the bottom. That'll give us kind of a nice little pool of butter under the dough once it all melts in the oven. Now we take out the dough boule. It has expanded by about a factor of 2. We're going to lay it in the middle of the pan. We're going to spread it gently around so that it fits into all the corners. We're going to try to keep it as flat as possible, but it's not going to be that big of a worry because we're going to proof the dough again a little bit in the oven after getting it into the pan. So don't worry too much about filling out the pan at this stage too much. We're going to give it a little bit more time in the warm oven before we start cooking, and that will get us a dough that fills the bottom of the pan nice and flat and relatively level. And then we're going to take that, we're going to throw it back in the oven with some plastic wrap over the top. And we'll leave that for another probably half an hour, I think is what I did. Again, you don't want to leave it too long because if you leave it too long, the yeast will produce large bubbles and it'll kind of flop over and not work well once you bake it. So here we go with the plastic wrap. That's just to keep moisture in while it's in the warm oven. You definitely don't want your dough to dry out while you're proofing it, so you got to keep it covered. In it goes. All right, the dough has been proofed in the warm oven again for another 30 minutes. You can use all kinds of different tomato sauces to do pizza. Generally speaking, you want something thicker rather than thinner. Pizza sauces that you get out of the grocery store are going to be really thick. But if you're careful to not overdo it, you can use just a pasta sauce that has a little bit of a thickener to it, whether it be cheese or, in this case, it's an Italian sausage-based sauce. Just spread that around. You don't want to quite hit the edges with the sauce because we want the cheese to be independent at the edges. But yeah, that was about 4 tablespoons of sauce, maybe a little less than that. I think I overdid it a little bit here, but it turned out all right. Once the sauce is spread over there, we're going to take a generous amount of shredded cheese. It's mostly mozzarella, but I also have some jalapeno pepper jack in there, just for a little bit of extra flavor. We're going to lay that across the top of the sauce, making sure to ensure that some of the cheese is hitting the edges of the pan. We're going to want to get those crispy edges, otherwise, what's the point? The amount of cheese that I use is probably about 4 ounces. There are those 8-ounce bars that you get at the store. I shredded about half of one of those to make the cheese for this. Then, I had a bunch of leftover pepperoni that I had used on pizzas last week, basically, but I hadn't used all of it up. And so I wanted to finish it off. There wasn't enough here for 2 pizzas, so I did a little bit of excess pepperoni on this one. Usually I just use like 8 or 9 slices of pepperoni for a pizza this size, but I just kind of overdid a little bit. Anyway, put those across the pizza. I usually start with a grid and then start filling out spaces between the grid if I have any extra or I desire any extra. Again, this is a little bit too much pepperoni, which led to the pizza being a little oilier than I usually want it to be. The problem with oiliness in a pizza, specifically this kind of pizza, is that it makes the edges less crispy because there's more liquid. All right, this is the completed pizza. I baked it at 400 Fahrenheit for approximately 16 minutes. The trick is to start out with like 10 minutes and then go 2 minutes at a time. There was a lot of moisture, and so later in the cooking process, opening up the oven makes it so that some of that excess water can get out. You don't want too much water vapor in there. Again, the less water vapor you have in the air around it, the crispier those edges are going to get. This size pizza works pretty well split into 4 slices. That way every slice gets some nice crispy edge to it. Again, this was an 8x8 dish, so they're decently sized pizza slices at 2x2 in the dish. You can see that I'm having a little bit of trouble here. You should have a little trouble cutting the edges of the cross cut that I'm making there. You can see I'm kind of cutting in at that edge right there, trying to get that one piece out in the corner. And those 2 points where it connects right in the edge with the other thing, that melted cheese is hard to cut with a spatula. But of course, since it's a coated pan, I can't use a knife to cut it there either without risking damaging the surface of the pan. So Just gotta kind of fiddle with it a bit. Anyway, you can let it sit after it comes out of the oven for a little bit longer. I let it sit for about 2 minutes, enough time for the direct sizzling to kind of slow down and mostly stop. But as you can see, the pizza dough and cheese are still steaming and nice and melted, and it looks pretty good and tastes even better. All right, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. That pizza was pretty good. The amount of pizza that I made, you could pretty easily break it up into like 2 solid meals, or even 4 small meals if you're gonna have some sides with it. You know, pretty. I'm saying this the day after, and it was pretty darn good. So yeah, that's all I've got for today. For my weekend, I'm going to be reading Slaughterhouse-5. For next week, we're going to do a little bit of an update on something that I talked about I think last week, because there's been some progress made there. That's kind of part of the plan for next week. We'll see what happens. And anyway, as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I think I already said that. But if you like what I'm doing and you want to help the channel out, you know what to do. Otherwise, I will see you on Monday. Have a good one. A good weekend, that is.